Great. So this year was an exciting year for us. We had a great group of researchers helping us out this year. This was the first year that we kind of split our nocturnal season, our nesting season, into a nocturnal phase and a diurnal phase. So it's part of a new approach that we have in the past. Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought I was like stealing your thunder or something like that. So yeah, and I'm sure these guys will tell you more about some of the protocol and whatnot, but it was exciting for us to start off and try this new protocol. This was the first season that we had more green turtle activities, if I'm not mistaken, than we had hawksbills. So there's some cool changes happening here at Buck Island, and these guys are going to tell you a little bit more about it. We also have had some other researchers come here and help us out this year. Max Afshar, who is a researcher with the University of the Virgin Islands, who's back over in St. Thomas tonight and can't make it, was conducting some research, so I'll probably touch on that as well. So lots of things happening with sea turtles here in the park. All right.
Wait.
Oh.
Smile.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you guys. All right, thanks.
All right, good evening, everybody. Today we're going to share with you what has been going on since we got here in July with the Buck Island Sea Turtle Research Program. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the results that we had from this season, and then talk about some of the independent projects that Natalie and I have been working on since we've been with the Park Service as well. Go ahead. Yeah. So the Buck Island Sea Turtle Research Program was initiated in 1988 by Zandy Hillis-Starr and by the previous superintendent to monitor the sea turtle populations that were nesting on Buck Island. So this program is managed by the National Park Service, Division of Resource Management, and it's kind of unique because this is one of the longest running sea turtle monitoring programs in the world. So as Clay said, this is 31 years of data collection now. And this program is not only unique because it's a long-running program, but this program is also tracking individuals or turtles at the individual level. So every turtle that comes up on the beach, we know exactly who she is, and each one of those females has a nesting history. And because of those histories, we can actually monitor these individuals over time, which has really helped us implement some conservation and management strategies for these species.
We also wanted to highlight the partnership we had with the Monnier Hotel. So every year we have about 4 to 6 interns that come down to help with this project, and we actually got to stay at the Monnier Hotel between July and October, so that was really, really nice. They gave us housing and food, which was super sweet of them, and in return we monitored their beaches. So they have 3 beaches, and we recorded all of their nesting activity. We also did some education and outreach at the hotel. So we did something called a turtle walk and talk, which I'll talk about a little later on. But we just went out with their guests, showed them the sea turtle tracks, and gave them a little more information about Buck Island. We also went to a weekly cocktail hour that they had. We set up a table and we spoke with the guests about our projects. So that was really fun.
Excellent. Okay. So all of our work is conducted over on Buck Island, which is part of the larger Buck Island Reef National Monument. This monument was established in 1961 and later expanded to encompass greater than 19,000 acres. This is the first fully protected marine park in the entire national park system, so that's pretty neat. It's a no-take marine reserve, meaning that extractive activities are prohibited. This is also one of the most popular tourist destinations in St. Croix.
So within the monument is Buck Island. It is 176 acres of a tropical dry forest. It also has 1,500 meters of shoreline. Most of this shoreline is rocky, but it does encompass 4 beaches, which is where we did our patrols. It is also an important habitat for many species. We have the brown pelican that's out there. We also monitor for least tern nesting in the spring, and then of course our sea turtles that come and nest. And the critically endangered St. Croix ground lizard, which we reintroduced, as well as 200 species of plants. So there's lots of things on Buck Island.
So 2 of the predominant species that we have on Buck Island are the Hawksbill and the green sea turtle. So the Hawksbill Sea Turtle is actually the reason why the Buck Island Sea Turtle program originated. So this is a critically endangered species that has historically been harvested for its beautiful shell. You can see its shell has a beautiful sunburst pattern, and people would harvest these turtles to make tools and jewelry out of its shell. It gets the name Hawksbill because it has a hawk-like beak, which it uses to eat sponges and other things off the coral reef systems where they reside. So to identify a Hawksbill sea turtle, you can see that the shell or the carapace towards the back, towards the tail, has these serrated scutes. That's an easy way to tell it's a hawksbill. Also using that sharp beak as an identifier. This is actually one of the smallest sea turtle species that we have in Buck Island, not getting much bigger than about 200 to 250 pounds.
We also have the green sea turtle species on your right. This is the largest hard-shelled sea turtle species. It can get around up to 400 pounds, and they have this tiny little head for their giant body. That's one of the ways we use to identify them. Instead of the serrated scutes, the back is actually fused. So it's kind of like this nice oval shape. The reason they get their name green sea turtle is because of the seagrasses they eat. When they eat these seagrasses, their inside tissue will turn a hue of green. So a lot of people think that it is the outer appearance is actually what's inside.
The inside of the shell.
Yeah.
Next slide. So we do have a couple other species of sea turtles that we do occasionally find nesting on Buck Island, although rather infrequently. So on the left, you can see the Loggerhead Sea Turtle. This turtle is known for its massive head and massive jaws, which is used to crush down on mollusks and crustaceans and other food sources like that.
And we also have the leatherback, and of course it gets its name from its leather back. These sea turtles dive to really deep depths, so if they did have a hard shell, the pressure of those depths would crush it. So they have adapted with this leathery carapace. This is one of the largest, or is the largest sea turtle species. So this sea turtle can get up to 2,000 pounds, and their diet consists mostly of jellyfish. Next, please.
Alright, so the typical life cycle of a sea turtle. So after females are done nesting on the beach, they make these migrations from Buck Island to foraging grounds where they reside in between nesting seasons. So they'll hang out at these foraging grounds for a few years before they come back to Buck Island or in close proximity to Buck Island to nest. So at night, these females will crawl up on the beach. They'll find a spot on the beach that they think is suitable, and then using just their two hind flippers, they construct a nest hole in the sand, which is pretty impressive for some of these massive animals. So after they dig this nest hole, they start depositing eggs. After all of the eggs are deposited, they use these same hind flippers to cover that nest hole and pat down that sand. And then the last thing they do before they leave the beach is they use all four flippers to start throwing sand everywhere around the nest. And what they're doing is camouflaging or hiding that nest so nothing will get to those eggs that are in the ground. So after those females are done, that's all of the parental care that mom gives. She goes back to the water and she's never going to see those hatchlings again.
And on that note, so when the hatchlings are in the nest hole, it takes about 60 days for their incubation period and until they will hatch out. So after or at these 60 days, we tend to look for a depression in the sand. So once the hatchlings start to hatch out, the sand will shift underneath and it'll form this dip in the sand, and that's how we'll know that in the next couple of days there's going to be a hatch out or boil. Once the hatchlings hatch out, they actually will all come out at once, so it kind of looks like a pot that is boiling over, and that's how it gets its name. They tend to hatch out at night for the cool temperatures. Also, there are less predators. But as soon as they all hatch out, they will head directly to the ocean, and what they're looking for is the brightest thing that they see. And so if there aren't any bright white lights, usually that'll be the moon's reflection on the water surface. So they'll head straight to the ocean and swim out to patches of sargassum in the water, and those patches provide them with shelter and food until they can get big enough to actually eat the seagrasses and the sponges that the hawksbills do.
So here we have a video from one of our female nesters that was nesting on West Beach. And you can see that it's kind of hard to see with the lighting, but she's using her two hind flippers to construct this nest cavity. So this is a hawksbill turtle, and I was actually with this turtle. And hawksbills are typical of nesting in very densely vegetative areas. So they go in these very dense beach forest areas. And in these areas, there's a lot of roots and vines. You can actually see in this video that she's encountered some of those roots, and she uses those hind flippers to power through to continue building that nest cavity. That individual in particular had to try, I think, she made 6 attempts at a nest hole before she finally decided to lay. So she was kind of picky in the area that she wanted to lay her nest.
Okay. Okay, so talking a little bit about our methods for the nocturnal season. Our nocturnal season went from mid-July to the first week in September. We went out every night and patrolled our beaches for 12 hours. So we went out at 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. to make sure we could intercept every nesting female that came up on Buck Island. Once we saw a female emerge or we saw her tracks, we went up to her to identify who she was. So each of our sea turtles have a tag on them, and we call that the primary tag. So once we were able to find that primary, we knew who she was. That's almost like their name. After identifying who she was and what she needed, we were able to either continue patrolling the beach, or if she was close to laying, we would stay with her and get ready to collect our data. Once she starts laying, sea turtles go into almost like a trance-like state. So they're not really paying attention to what we're doing, and that's the best time for us to work on them. So they each get 4 flipper tags, and they also get something called a pit tag in their shoulder. So that's an internal tag. If you guys have cats or dogs with microchips in them, it's very similar to that. It's something that you have to scan over to be able to tell if they have. So we will give them a pit tag if they don't have it. We're collecting measurements. This is Jess collecting this Hawksbill's measurements. We'll also get genetic samples for DNA analysis, and we'll get some carapace samples. So that's a couple layers of their carapace, and it can actually tell us what these turtles have been eating. And we record every nest location. So we make sure we know where the nest is, and we make sure we can come back to that. We relocate any imperiled nests. So any nests that are below the high tide line, we want to make sure we get them to a safe distance up on the beach, and any nests in high foot traffic areas. So our goal for the nocturnal season was to record every nesting activity on the beach.
All right, so after the nocturnal season ended in early September, from September through early November was our diurnal season. So during this time, we still went out to Buck Island, but we didn't go out as frequently. We went out about a couple times a week, and this was during the day. So this made our jobs a whole lot harder because we're no longer seeing turtles on the beach. We're just seeing their tracks that they've left behind from the night before or the previous couple nights. So you can identify the species or the type of sea turtle by their crawl or their track in the sand. So if you look at the figure on the left here, that's a picture of a Hawksbill Sea Turtle track. And I can tell, 1, because it's very small in comparison to this one over here. And 2, when Hawksbills are crawling up on the beach, they're actually alternating their flippers or alternating their gait, which creates a different pattern from green sea turtles, who are much bigger, they have a much wider track, and green sea turtles are moving both flippers at the exact same time. They're not alternating like those Hawksbills. So they create 2 very different pictures in the sand, and that's how we can tell which one's which. So these tracks not only tell us who's crawling up on the beach or what kind of turtle is crawling up on the beach, but we can also identify what they were doing while they were on the beach. So during this time, we were recording every single activity, and whether it was a lay, whether it was a suspected lay, maybe the turtle came up and for whatever reason she didn't want a nest, so she went back to the water, we were recording all of these activities. So another thing we were doing during the diurnal season was those nests that we had located when the females were on the beach. We knew their location, so 60 days later, after they had hatched, we went back to these same nests and performed a nest excavation. So we essentially dug up all of the nest contents that were in the nest, and we sorted everything out. So we saw how many shells hatched, how many shells didn't hatch. And for those shells that didn't hatch, we actually physically opened every single egg and determined the developmental stage of the hatchlings inside the egg, which is pretty cool. So all of these contests are giving us an idea of the reproductive success of this female. Oftentimes we also encounter live hatchlings that for whatever reason didn't make it out of the nest. So sometimes we'll find hatchlings and we release those guys as well. Next.
Okay, so just a brief summary of the 2018 nesting activities. We saw a total of 67 individual turtles. So these turtles are who we saw come up during the nocturnal seasons, because we are able to identify who each of them are. There are 37 Hawksbills and 30 greens. Out of these 67 individuals, there were about 69% of them were re-migrants, which means that they had already been to our beaches. So we had about 31% new turtles to Buck Island. So that's really good news. It means that Buck Island is still recruiting sea turtles to nest after all of this time. We had just over 700 sea turtle activities in all, 126 confirmed lays, 64 which were Hawksbills, and 62 that were greens. And out of the 126 confirmed lays, 46 were relocated. So that number is kind of high for our beaches, but because of the storms, the hurricanes last year, we lost a lot of those nests. So we had a different relocation protocol this year. We wanted to make sure that most of the nests that were laying were laid in safe areas. So we did relocate a lot this year. About 47% of all 700 activities were recorded in August. So that is definitely our peak month. Almost half of our activities were in August. It was busy that month.
That's crazy.
Yeah. We didn't have any record of leatherback or loggerhead activities this season. So just the Hawksbills and greens.
So in total in 2018, we completed 120 excavations, which is pretty awesome considering we had 126 lays. So that was for a couple of reasons. There were more hands on the beach this year, and we were also able to go out to Buck Island pretty frequently, so we were able to excavate a lot of these nests. So this table here is showing some reproductive success of some of these nests. So if we look, hatch success is something that we use. It's basically the percentage of hatchlings that hatch out of eggs inside the nest. So for Hawksbills, their hatch success was about 77%. It was a little bit higher for greens. Hatch success is different than emergent success, because just because a turtle hatches out of its shell does not mean it's actually going to make it out of the nest completely onto the beach. So sometimes turtles will get entangled in roots and vines. We saw a lot of that during this season, especially for the Hawksbill nests. So emergent success is typically a little bit smaller than your hatch success. So Hawksbills was about 73% and greens was about 77% for this field season. On average, in each Hawksbill nest, there were about 146 eggs deposited, and in each green nest, there were about 105 eggs. During this whole season, we counted over 15,000 sea turtle eggs, and from Buck Island in 2018, there was a hatchling production of 12,268 hatchling turtles, Hawksbill and green sea turtles, which is pretty cool.
Okay, so not only did we look at numbers for 2018, we also did a 5-year review of the years 2014 to 2018. So this graph is showing the total nesting activities by species. The blue line is Hawksbill sea turtles, and the green line is green sea turtles. As you can see, they stay pretty consistent for a couple years, and Hawksbills are always on top. But as Clay mentioned at the beginning, 2018 is the first year that green sea turtle activities outnumbered Hawksbills. So this perhaps shows a shift in the nesting dynamics on Buck Island, but we'll have to continue to monitor to actually find that out. And then you can see in 2017 there is a big drop in green activities. It looks like it's just at 100 activities for that year. And as I mentioned before, Irma and Maria occurred last year, and we have typically seen that greens nest later in the season. So when they were coming up to nest, we weren't physically able to go out and monitor those beaches then. So that could be one of the reasons why the nesting activity is so low. Also, greens nest in open beach areas. So the storm surge will more likely take out a green nest than a Hawksbill nest, which is in the beach forest further up. And Jess is going to talk.
So these kind of trends, go back for 1 second. These kind of trends kind of demonstrate how important these long-term monitoring programs like BISTRP are. We're able to track these individual sea turtles over time and look at their trends and their patterns on Buck Island. And resource managers can use that information to implement management tactics and conservation tactics in the future to make sure that these guys are around for a lot longer.
Okay. Bye. Thank you. So yeah, that's the end of our BISTRP report. if you guys have any questions at this time, we're going to talk a little bit about our own projects, but we want to make sure you guys get your questions out about the sea turtle project first.
Yeah.
In one of the earlier slides, one of the turtles was critically endangered and the other was just endangered. What
Yes.
does that mean?
So these turtles are on a scale of all sea turtle species, so there's 7 different sea turtle species around the world, and they're all listed as either threatened or endangered or critically endangered. So this is kind of a spectrum of how well these turtles are doing. Threatened is bad, but the best of bads. And critically endangered is there's not many of these guys left. What are we going to do to help these guys? So critically endangered is about the worst you can get. That's right before a species goes extinct.
Yeah.
I hate to ask this, but what is the percentage of the many thousands of hatchlings that survive?
It's pretty
If there's
depressing.
any-
Yes, so that's a good question. The statistic is about 1 in 1,000 sea turtle hatchlings will make it to sexual maturity. So these sea turtle moms come up on the beach 3, 4, 5 times a season, and they lay about 100 to 150 eggs. So they do lay a lot of eggs each season, and that is because not many hatchlings will actually survive to sexual maturity.
How old is sexual maturity?
About 20, 25 years for
Yeah.
sea turtles.
Wow.
Yeah. It takes a little while for
It
them.
does.
Is there a question over here?
Any notion on how many actually survive till they're this big?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know that.
What was the question?
It's like
About
how
juvenile, how many do you think will make it to
survive
juvenile?
in this. I think what I've heard is most of them do die as a hatchling because that's when they're most vulnerable.
Yeah,
vulnerable.
anything bigger than them will eat them as hatchlings, unfortunately.
Right. So
Yeah, there's been a couple studies that they did where they were looking at hatchlings as they followed the hatchlings from the beach to open ocean, and they found that it was very high mortality as they tried to cross the reef crest. It'd be like 96, 97% of the hatchlings would get eaten by snapper and stuff like that as they tried to cross over.
Yeah.
So how long does it take them to grow from, this big when they hatch to something where they're actually a little safe? How much time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So a lot of it has to do with diet and temperature, but turtles have what we call like a lost years period or phase. And what happens is they actively swim offshore, they get caught up in these big ocean gyres or currents, and they wind up in these rack lines. And for 3 to 5 years, they may be just floating in like the pelagic environment, feeding. Usually they're omnivores at that point, so they're just feeding on whatever they can in those rack lines. And then when they're about dinner plate size, so maybe 5 to 10 years, they show back up into neritic habitats or nearshore habitats. And that's when we start to do some in-water work, the juvenile work that we do out at Buck Island. We start capturing them, and sometimes they're small, like 22 centimeters or so. And we think those individuals are probably about 5 to 7 years old. It's really hard to age turtles. It's not a
5 years to dinner plate size.
yeah.
It's hard being a turtle.
Takes them a little bit.
real way. Yeah.
Is the diet of the hawksbill and green turtles, is that the same? And what does it mostly consist of?
Right, so Hawksbill turtles, you normally find them hanging out on coral reefs. So they feed on sponges. They have those really sharp-like beaks to get to those sponges. Whereas green sea turtles hang out in seagrass beds, and they feed on thalassia or turtle grass.
To follow up on that, do you know what age they kind of settle out? Because they both are at the surface eating whatever, seaweed.
Yeah,
Wild.
that's still kind of a gray area for us because of those lost
The
years.
lost years.
Yeah,
Mhm.
there's a lot of up and coming research in that area right now though, because that's one critical life stage that we really don't know all that much about.
How many turtles are how many turtles are there in the whole world?
In the whole world? That's a really good question, Clay. We hope
You stumped me. I think I would a lot less than there used to be. We know that, and that's why they're listed as critically endangered or threatened. What they've done now is they've kind of lump turtles into regional management units because even though there's a global population of turtles, it's easier for us to understand what they're doing on a regional scale. So they have regional management units, so there might be a group of turtles, green turtles in the Caribbean, or there might be some over in the Indian Ocean, and each of those units is managed a little bit differently depending on how many of the turtles are still left. We'll Google it and get back to you.
It's 6,153,422. Anytime.
Right.
Yes.
You guys, you're with the Park Service, so you're going to Buck Island. Do you do any other beaches around St. Croix?
We
personally don't.
Yeah, we do not, but there are other monitoring programs around St. Croix. Yeah.
Right.
Sandy Point is out west. They do a lot of leatherback work. Marine Park does a little work.
Nature
On the
Conservancy.
east, yeah.
So there's a bunch of great partnerships and collaboration. So there's a couple federal agencies, the Park Service and Sandy Point, each have a program, and the one on Sandy Point's actually expanded to include green turtles and hawksbills as well. And then there's a couple of NGOs that go out and look around, and then there's some programs that rely on volunteerism, which have been really great on the South Shore and a bunch of the beaches near like Cheney Bay and stuff like that. There's a bunch of them that people just like walking on the beach and they help out and they record numbers and whatnot. And it all gets fed in. Those numbers get fed into DPNR, so the territory reports on those beaches. And if somebody was from the territory, they could probably report on those specific numbers a bit better.
The South Shore out east is pretty popular with turtles.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Hay Penny's a big one. And
From Jack's Bay all the way up,
Oh, yeah.
where you can walk down there from the east end. Once you get in the sand, you can see, I have many times, signs
Yes.
of the turtles. The tracks,
Right.
the leathery eggshells around the nest.
so that's a great program. That's the Nature Conservancy was usually historically taken on that effort, and they monitored over there. And so what we found actually through some of our satellite work, which Jess is going to touch on here in a little bit, some of those turtles are a shared resource. They nest on Jack and Isaac's Bay, and then they come over to Buck Island. They'll nest on that beach as well. So it's only through those saturation tagging and monitoring programs that we're able to really see that. It's pretty cool.
So the satellites can read the tag in the shoulder?
Not that one. There's actually another type of tag that you can affix to the carapace or the shell of an individual, and then every time that animal breaks the surface, it basically records a GPS point. So you can track these animals in the water. Yeah.
Okay.
So was there leatherback activity previously, and I forgot the other species, the
Loggerhead?
loggerhead?
They were, yeah. So Clay's year, as an intern, he actually saw a leatherback mom come up to nest. And that's really rare on Buck Island because we start our nesting season in July, or we start patrolling in July. And leatherbacks typically come up between the months of like February to June. So it's not common for us to actually see them, but what we will see sometimes is leatherback hatch-outs. So when the mom does come up and lay, the leatherback hatchlings hatching out of the nest and then coming down to the beach, or coming down to the water. But unfortunately this year we were not so lucky, and we didn't see any loggerheads or leatherbacks, but with all 701 activities. You guys have any more questions?
Should I be worried about how they breathe once they break out of their shell before they climb out of their nest? I mean,
No.
what's going on there?
That's an interesting question. So they actually, between the particles of sand, there's been some research on this, but there is enough oxygen in the nest cavity for them to survive. Yes. For
Tiny
those
nostrils.
tiny little lungs. But no, it is interesting because they are under quite a bit of sand.
Sure.
And
no,
they are.
I've seen that. I've been there, witnessed that, and I've always been curious as how they breathe once
Right.
they break out of their shell.
Yeah.
But they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's enough oxygen. It's pretty amazing.
You mentioned that almost 70% were re-emergent. Do you have a time frame, like how long the oldest one has been coming?
Some of these turtles have been coming up since the program started 30 years ago. So some of these females have been hanging around for decades.
Really old moms.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's really cool too, so We did some genetic work with the University of Georgia and Dr. Brian Shamlin, I think it was like 5 or 7 years ago now. And they were looking at the population of green turtles and seeing if it was like a unique population that would warrant some extra sort of protection. And what we found is all the green turtles can basically be traced back to like 1 or 2 founding females. And so all the green turtles that we have up here are all aunts and daughters from those couple of turtles that came up. So that was pretty exciting for us. But yeah, some of the turtles we still see, and they've been coming back for 31 years, probably, and they've probably been nesting that buck even longer than that. So it's pretty exciting.
Any other questions? Okay.
One
Yeah.
more. How long will a turtle lay once she's reached sexual maturity? For how many years?
For most of the lifetime. So turtles have about the same lifespan as humans do. So like Natalie said, they'll lay about between 3 and 5 nests in a season, and they'll keep laying until they can't do it anymore. So for most of their lives.
Alright. So we have a few slides at the end of talking a little bit about what we did after turtle season or throughout turtle season. Okay, so I stayed on to help out with the turtle program and to also help NPS with their education and outreach events. These are a couple of events that occurred while I was here. You guys may have heard of some of these going on. But the first one is the Noaa Okeanos Explorer Expedition. So Noaa actually brought down a vessel here and mapped out parts of the monument. So they went to really deep depths to see what the deepest depth was, and they also saw some really cool critters. The picture to your right is 2 classes that were able to participate in a Skype event with scientists on the ship. So they were able to ask questions and really interact with them, which is really exciting. And next is the Native Plant Restoration Project. We brought students and volunteers out to help plant some of our native plants that were lost on Buck Island, and they did that for a couple of days, and they also got to see some sea turtle hatchlings because we were doing excavations at that time too. The Turtle Walk and Talk program, which I talked a little bit about before, and then the program that I primarily worked with was the Ticket to Ride program. So this has been going on for a couple years now. It's coordinated by Ranger Benito Vegas, and we have lots of very wonderful volunteers. I see some of them in the audience today. We partnered with Big Beard's Adventure Tours, and they actually brought 8 5th grade classes out to Buck Island. So this was really special for them. A lot of these kids had never been to Buck Island before, even though they lived on St. Croix. So they got to experience the magic of Buck Island. And I talked a little bit to them about our sea turtle nesting program, the kind of animals that you're going to find on Buck Island. And we also did a hike up to the observation platform, talked about the reef system around Buck Island. And then at the end, they were able to swim. So that was the most exciting part for them. They saw a lot of cool fish in there. We also saw some turtles popping their heads up on the ride over, which was exciting. So that was a really great program to work with. And then also I've helped out with the social media outreach. So Zandy, if you want to click next. Yeah. So who in this room follows Buck Island Reef National Monument and the Friends of St. Croix? Raise a hand on Facebook.
Well, you all should.
About half of you? Okay, awesome. So if you don't, we would love to have you follow us on these 2 platforms. We try to update weekly on what's going on in the park. Jess and I created Turtle Tuesday, so I don't know if you guys have been seeing that on your timeline, but we try to keep you guys informed about what's going on with the turtle program and other projects that are going on in the park. Yeah, and if you guys have any suggestions for what you would like to see on the Facebook pages, we would love to hear them. Yes.
Next one's in. Thank you. Yeah, so in addition to doing Buck Island Sea Turtle Research Program, I've also been working on an independent project for my master's studies at the University of Miami. So what I was kind of interested in looking at is, you may remember from before I told you that these females, after they're done nesting on Buck Island, they're traveling to these foraging grounds where they hang out for a few years in between nesting seasons. Now, some females are traveling hundreds to thousands of kilometers away. And we know that these migrations to and from foraging grounds in Buck Islands is a really big energetic cost for these animals. So what I was interested in looking at was, are these migration distance, are these energetic costs reflected in what these females are producing or putting out on Buck Island beaches? So I wanted to know if it was impacting their reproductive success on the beach. So to do that, NPS has been in collaboration with U.S. Geological Survey, and a researcher by the name of Dr. Kristen Hart has come down to Buck Island, and she has satellite tagged 31 individual female Hawksbill turtles. So the satellite tags look like this picture on the bottom left, and like I said, every time that animal comes to the surface to breed, it records a location. So essentially, once these females go back in the water, we're able to track their movements and see where they're going. Next slide, Jan. So some of these turtles, you can see on this figure on the right, are hanging out in the Virgin Islands. Some are going up to the BVIs, some are hanging out around Puerto Rico, and other turtles are traveling thousands of kilometers to places like Nicaragua and Venezuela. And each of these females can be tracked on seaturtle.org. If you go to that website and type in Buck Island Sea Turtles, you can see all of these turtles' movements, which is pretty cool. But what I found was that these big migration patterns and these migration distances that they're traveling to get to Buck Island, I didn't find any relationships between the distance they traveled and their reproductive success on the beach. But it kind of led to an interesting question in that, if these females don't have some kind of reproductive advantage on the beach, why are some traveling so much farther than others? So that was a really fun kind of research question to explore for my degree. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to talk about this. I just defended a couple days ago, so I talked about it all the time, and I'm happy to talk about it a little more if anybody wants to hear anything. But yeah, other than that, that's all we have planned for this evening. So any comments, questions? Otherwise, we're going to hand it over to Clay, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the Park Service.
So why do they travel so far?
Yeah, good question. Here we go, round two. So some people think it has something to do with the predictability of where these foraging grounds are. So as an example of this, green sea turtles around Buck Island and in other areas have been noted going back to the same foraging plots year after year after year. And they have this really cool strategy where they actually crop or graze on the same seagrass beds over and over and over again. And what they're doing, whether they realize it or not, is that they're actually promoting regrowth. And this is kind of food security for these animals. So perhaps these Hawksbill turtles are going back to these same foraging grounds year after year because they're predictable for them. And going back to these same places is eliminating all of the other competition that they would have if they went to another area. And if you're expanding your population or just dispersing your population over a larger area, you're actually increasing the stability of your population. So if we had like a big catastrophic event to happen within the monument, and it happened in a certain area, then only some of those individuals would be affected and not the entirety of the population. So a lot of people think it has something to do with diet as to why they're traveling so far, long story short.
Why don't they stay? Why do they leave?
Excellent question. So if you think about it, if you have a bunch of sea turtles kind of residing in the same general area, you're going to have to compete for all your resources. So kind of to ensure that you're going to have everything you need, you may have to disperse a little bit farther or move farther away from others to eliminate that competition. Yeah.
And this is kind of outside that box, but the stability of that food source, I'm just wondering how stable that is. I mean, we have storms and storm surge and seagrass beds get covered all the time.
So that's a good question. And it kind of, you want to have to think about this in terms of how the monument may have used to look many, many years ago compared to how it's looking now. So we know that coral reefs aren't doing so hot now, and decades ago, these coral reefs were thriving. So it could be that maybe the patchiness of these coral reef systems, or maybe because they're so degraded now, maybe that's also contributing to why some of these turtles have to go farther than others, just because there's not suitable foraging habitat for these animals anymore. Because these coral reefs have degraded so much, so maybe they have to go farther to find ample resources to support them. Yeah.
So I presume these guys, especially the Hawksbill and the green turtles, are it's shallow water basically they're staying.
Sure is.
Something less than 120 feet.
Right. And that's pretty typical because most of the coral reef systems that you find are shallow water reef systems.
Right.
So they're hanging out around these habitats, which are also found in these shallow water systems.
And because Hawksbill eats sponges, is there a relationship between a grain dying reef and lack of sponges? Noaa?
Definitely could be a thing. I'm not familiar with the topic, but definitely if a reef isn't thriving, I assume that the species that are inhabiting the reef aren't doing as well either.
The whole ecosystem
Exactly.
is
Collapsing. Right. Yeah.
So in terms of the seagrass, in these foraging areas, did you look to see if the foraging areas were all made up of similar grasses and things?
Yeah, so there's actually been a lot of studies on the seagrasses that are at the seagrass beds around Buck Island, and one of the PhD students that's working at Buck Island has video footage of a lot of green sea turtles grazing in the general area. So they've actually seen them go back to these same seagrass plots and crop the same seagrasses over and over again. They prefer a species called Thalassia, which has the common name turtle grass, but they'll feed on other seagrass species, algae, other things like that as well.
And will they find those things off the coast of Nicaragua and the same species on and all
Good
those
question. Yeah, so these are hawksbill movements. These are hawksbills.
Oh, so they're looking for
green sea turtles do indeed migrate as well. I'm not sure if any are going from this area to Nicaragua, but we are familiar with a lot of turtles, green turtles, residing around Buck Island in those seagrass plots. Yeah. Yeah.
The sargasso algae we had in great profusion, is that something that's part of their diet?
So, like Natalie said, as hatchlings, they'll usually hang out in that sargassum, and it kind of serves two purposes. It's camouflage for them, because when they're that young, they're basically anything bigger than them is going to eat them. So that's camouflage and habitat for them. And they also eat not necessarily the sargassum, but what's hanging out inside the sargassum. So there's little crabs and little fish and other little critters like that they'll mainly feed on. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us today.
How many NPS employees are actually engaged in waterside duties here?
With the Buck Island Sea Turtle Research Program, or just park in general?
That and the park in general.
So during the program, we had 4 interns and 2 staff members that would go out every night. So there were 7 of us, including another graduate student. So 7 personnel monitoring the beaches every night, and now, I don't know how many staff members are participating in.
So the interns, you're here temporarily?
Yeah, we actually leave next week.
So for less than a year, you're here?
Yeah.
Maybe only 6 months.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. Want to close us out, or?
Sure. So yeah, there's a couple good segues. Lots of sea turtle work going on at Buck Island. You guys touched a little bit about the seagrass work that's been ongoing with a researcher from the University of Florida with some kind of critter cams. And they're finding that turtle grazing is actually a good thing, and that seagrasses continue to sequester carbon, which is important. There was a fear that sea turtles were overgrazing, and that this was going to somehow negatively impact the ability of seagrass pastures to sequester carbon. But what in fact we're finding is they're doing it just as well under these naturally grazed systems. So that's a positive thing. We also saw some sharks, which was really cool and exciting. So there was potential to build on that for some predator-prey interaction type studies. Some of the other work that we've done with turtles is more to do with the juvenile turtles. So we've been going out with Dr. Kristen Hart and capturing small turtles and putting acoustic tags on them. And so Bernard and Kai are familiar with acoustic tags. They put them on or inside lionfish and look at the movements on a fine scale. So satellite tags are really good for these large scale movements, but they're not as good for really fine scale stuff. So inside the monument, we have this large passive acoustic array, and using those acoustic tags, we're able to look at habitat preference and the timing of movements that juvenile sea turtles are undergoing throughout the day and over months, basically.
I'm a windsurfer. What kind of sharks?
Yeah. So we have a variety of sharks out there. So some of the ones that were really exciting for us to see were there was a hammerhead that we saw, like an 8-foot, 10-foot hammerhead, and then We've had some other larger sharks, some tiger sharks that we've captured out there, like 8 to 11-foot tiger sharks.
Is this between Buck Island and St. Croix or north of Buck?
Everywhere. So we have this acoustic array. There's some receivers down in Salt River. There's some out at Lame Bank. There's some in the East End Marine Park in like Teak Bay. We have receivers in 130 feet of water. We have receivers in 8 feet of water, and these tiger sharks show up on basically every single one. So they make huge.
But not in
numbers.
Teague Bay, really.
But, right.
Yeah.
Not during the day when you're ice surfing. But yeah, they traverse the whole east end of St. Croix as far as we can tell. Very active. And then we have some smaller shark species that tend to hold tighter residencies. The lemon sharks, the nurse sharks, and the Caribbean reef sharks really kind of have smaller territories. But what's been cool having the receivers out at Lame Bank is each one of them are at least one of the species that were tagged, or one of the individuals tagged for each of those species, has made that migration out to Lame Bank, and it usually coincides when we have a lot of fish spawning. So they seem to realize that, oh, there's going to be a bunch of food available. This is the time to go out there and take advantage of that. So they do make those movements out there that coincide with the mutton snapper spawning or the red hinds spawning. Yeah.
So, have you ever, any of you guys that are here now, the MPS, ever seen on the north side of Buck Island, close to the shore? You know, the reef is really close to the beach there.
Oh yeah.
And the sand moves around a little bit, but it was years ago, and I haven't seen it lately, but I haven't been out there much. You could get all the way out there by the end of the beach where the trail from up top comes down and the rocks start, and we counted 17 sightings one time of these sharks, all about this big, swimming in the shallows, just back and forth.
So those are usually the little lemon sharks, and we definitely keep an eye out for them when we're on patrols. And you see them, you just see the reflection in their eye when we're out there at night and they're cruising. We're definitely excited about that. We see them too. You typically don't see the reef sharks, the smaller reef sharks. You'll get some of the medium-sized ones that have come in and kind of actually go after some of the smaller juvenile sharks. But the reef sharks typically like mangrove habitat and like really kind of turbid water that you don't see too well in. But the lemon sharks really love that really shallow, clear water on the flats like that. So that's probably what you saw as
We've seen
little
nurse sharks out there too, at least this season. We've had a few instances of nurse sharks just cruising the shoreline on Buck Island while we're on patrol.
And at night when you're not expecting that, you're just kind of like shining your light. And it's like, turtle, no, that's a shark.
You know, in the 70s, I was going to Buck Island every day taking tourists through the trail, so I was there a lot.
Cool.
I never saw a shark on the trail. Never.
Well, there's a
Now, I know
concerted
that
effort.
I had to have some now and then, but I was there a lot. Never saw one. But these days, I see sharks on the trail frequently.
The monument's doing what it's supposed to do. So there was a concerted effort at one point to rid the area of sharks. There was concern about the tourism product and brand down here. They wanted to avoid any unwanted interactions. And so there was an effort to actually get rid of some of the sharks. But it's been a while since that's happened, and you're starting to see those populations rebound and what a healthy ecosystem looks like. There's sharks out there. There should be.
Are they friendly?
I have one other question. If you guys have been at the trail, you snorkeled the trail, and maybe if you've been here longer, a few years.
Yeah, I've been here about 7 years.
Are you under the impression that the elkhorn is recovering in the area of the trail and the area of near shore Buck Island?
So that's a really great question. I do think that we still have a long ways to go with the recovery of some of the elkhorn and stuff out there. And we've got studies underway that are looking into maybe some of the reasons why we're not seeing that recovery happen as quickly as we would like. I think a big initiative that the territory could get behind would be some truly reef-safe kind of sunscreen products. And so there might be some kind of link between people going out there and really applying sunblock, which is a good thing. We don't want anyone getting skin cancer or anything like that. but also some of those products have endocrine inhibitors that are detrimental to corals. And so if in the future, if we collectively decide that we want to, I don't want to say ban those products, but veer away from those products and use more reef safe stuff, maybe we'll see a positive impact on the corals out there, because there are other areas within the monument where we don't have as high visitation, and we are seeing those areas, they're a little bit healthier.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I know the reef out there, north of Buck and east of Buck, is big. There's a lot of reef.
Yeah, it can be expansive. So there's a lot of things going on that affect coral health. We do have some warming sea surface temperatures. We have more frequent storms, and these stressors on these animals often open them up for disease. And so we have rampant disease. I don't know if everyone's familiar with some of the disease that's going through South Florida right now. This wasting disease is just incredible, the rate at which it's killing coral. So we've really excited about some of the work that we've done in terms of disease mitigation out at Buck Island. So we've actually had some partners from Moat that have come down and really looked at ways to curb the spread of disease. And so they're chiseling these firewalls along big colonies and applying, almost like in a fire situation where you'd have a gap so that the fire would have to leap over. There's the same kind of concept. You'd create this barrier and the disease would hit that wall basically and stop. And we found that was working pretty well, but it wasn't perfect. And so now they want to come back and see if they can use that same technique, but also add in a layer of like topical antibiotic or something that would be basically toxic to the bacteria that's comprised of these diseases, and see if those two things combined would have a greater positive effect. Yeah, so that's really exciting stuff too. Yeah, and then I think sure, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna ask, have you seen the presence of these sharks cause any shifts in the nesting locations of the turtles themselves?
Awesome. That's a great question. So that's kind of where I was headed. So some of the acoustic telemetry work that we do is actually, the technology has gotten to a point where you can affix what's called a transceiver onto a large shark, and this instrument acts not only as a receiver and detects when transmitters are within its area, but it also transmits. So you have this passive array that's collecting data on that large shark, and then that shark is acting like a mobile receiver as well. And so with that technology, you're able to quantify the frequency and duration of interactions between individuals. So you'd be able to hypothetically see if a big shark came into the area, a bunch of turtles disperse and vacate the area, and then you'd be able to see maybe that shark followed around one turtle, or maybe it didn't and it just moved through the area and all the turtles came back after 15 minutes. But some of the partnerships that we have, some of the collaborators with the University of Massachusetts in particular, are really starting to drill down and look at interactions. And so we have, and UVI as well. So there's that tight cluster of acoustic receivers that are so close together that they can triangulate a transmitter. And so then you can really look at fine scale movements, and you can look at how animals interact with each other. So if there's a big barracuda that comes through, maybe all the snappers or whatever kind of get real low and close to the reef, and they get out of the way for a little bit and they change their behavior. So you can see them normally like out foraging around, they're kind of out in the open. Boom, all of a sudden a shark comes through and they bunker down, they don't move as much, they're kind of scared for a little while. So yeah, with some of the technology, we're starting to see patterns and relationships between animals in the community out there. It's really cool.
Is there a turtle species that they prefer to prey upon? Could that change the diversity of the ones nesting?
So there's been some other studies that suggest that there would be a preference, and it usually has to do with how they attack. So out in Australia, for instance, they were looking at a difference between green turtles and loggerheads, which are pretty common in Shark Bay. And so what they were finding is, I believe it's loggerheads were spending a lot more time on the surface, kind of lollygagging around, taking in a lot of deep breaths, and they were the species that was found to have a lot more mortality or like loss of limb and stuff like that. versus the green turtles were coming up to the surface, taking a real quick breath, and right back down. So we haven't done studies like that out at Buck Island. I would guess basically that they're probably going after green turtles more often because we see a lot more juvenile green turtles, and they're kind of tend to be out in the open a little bit more at risk. Not that anyone else is at risk. They're looking for turtles. You don't really look like a turtle. Yeah. Hey, great.
I look enough like a turtle.
Right. So yeah.
Do you have some acoustics at Manchineal Bay?
No, we don't right now. No.
I'm wondering. And Hawksbills, do they often pay visits to the south side of Buck Island, or is that simply the west side?
Say that again. Where did we find most of them?
Hawksbills. I was asking if they made a comeback on the south side, or if they were simply hanging out on the west side like they used to.
Oh, so there was a study done in the late 90s that was looking at the relative abundance and distribution of hawksbills within the monument. And what they found at that time, they were finding them pretty close to the underwater trail at that time, but there was also this prey item that that was in high abundance, and they really liked. It was a zoanthid species. And so there was such a high abundance of that species that all those hawksbills tended to aggregate around that area. So it was really easy to call that a hot spot. For whatever reason, that zoanthid species is no longer in high abundance or high concentration, and so it's more of a diffuse kind of prey base. And now we see the same pattern with the hawksbills. They're just kind of everywhere, roughly equally, with some preference shown for obviously coral reef systems. Yeah, so there wasn't much of a difference between the north and south side. Yeah.
We're running into our time.
If anyone ever wants to talk about turtles, you know where we are. We're around.
So, thank you all for coming. Thank our presenters. I'd also like to thank the board at Friends of the Park, Susan Wall, Nina York. I don't know, is Sarah, you still here? I think Sarah's gone. And Rick Starr, who is making a video of this presentation, and it will be up on our website, which is stxparkfriends.org, where you will also find what our future programs are. We're still in the planning stage for 2019.
Yeah, no, I really want to thank you guys too, because the Friends group was able to support Natalie's extension this year. Which was
And the rest of the presentation.
and so she touched on all the education outreach work that she was able to do, and so this is kind of the, what we're able to do with that kind of support. So really, thank you, appreciate that a lot.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Like you right.